Defense News is proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, an unprecedented mobilization of the National Guard to the U.S. Capitol in advance of the presidential inauguration. The new nominee for Secretary of Defense heads to Capitol Hill. We'll get an update on the Defense Department's efforts to speed up tech innovations on the battlefield. Plus, the second part of our series on how an MRE is born, and the latest on U.S. troops in Africa. With the latest news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. There's lots to get through in this episode, so let's jump right in. Upward of 25,000 National Guard members were stationed all around a lockdown capital in Washington this week, as police and military authorities sought to fortify the area around President Joe Biden's inauguration. The troops set up an expansive perimeter in Washington, D.C., with the aim of deterring more violent rioting around the inaugural events. For a look at the unprecedented Guard presence, the Military Times team was on hand in the city.
With the inauguration of President Joe Biden taking place amidst potentially violent tensions in the United States, the Capitol has become a virtual fortress, likened by some to the military green zone around the U.S. compound in Baghdad. Because of several threats and a deadly riot at the Capitol, some 25,000 National Guard members from across the United States were called up to defend and patrol the area around Capitol Hill. They were armed with M4 rifles, riot gear, and streets in all directions around the inauguration site were cordoned off. Authorities went to stunning lengths to protect the ceremonies. The FBI screened thousands of troops for signs of extremist activities, and a dozen were eventually dismissed from inauguration duty. Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy spoke about the FBI vetting process earlier in the week.
January 6th, there were representatives from all of the services who were at the rally when it started on the ellipse and then migrated towards the Capitol. So the question is that all of them? Are there others? So it's clearly something we need to be conscious of inside the entire formation, let alone men and women that may be assigned to this operation here in the Capitol. We've also been vetting them through the FBI, getting support from the Federal Bureau of Investigation to continue the vetting of every man and woman that come here. We have a process through our JRSOI process where we vet them. So we're continually going through the process and taking second, third looks at every one of the individuals assigned to this operation.
With troops ready to serve, the U.S. Marshal Service deputized several thousand Guard members earlier in the week, which gives them some law enforcement capability.
I will perform the duties of the Special Deputy United States Marshal
with integrity,
professionalism,
and impartiality.
The historic show of force appeared to have worked. No protests like the one seen on January 6th when rioters stormed the Capitol in support of President Trump had materialized or interrupted the ceremony, and streets around the inauguration site were mostly calm. And as calm as it seemed, it wasn't without danger. Several dozen National Guard members tested positive for COVID-19 in the days leading up to the ceremony. And while deadly violence and tear gas filled that Capitol building 2 weeks prior, the ceremony itself was particularly quiet. President Biden was sworn in before a national mall that was not filled with Americans, as it traditionally has been, but with nearly 200,000 flags representing the people who couldn't attend because of the pandemic. For an inside look inside of the ceremony itself, we go to Military Times Capitol Hill Bureau Chief Leo Shane.
Hey, this is Leo Shane, Capitol Hill Bureau Chief for Military Times at the inauguration for President Joe Biden. Quite a different inauguration than what we saw 4 years ago for President Trump. Several thousand guard troops around here. No crowd, just the flags waving on the National Mall. On my way in here, I saw a lot of riot shields, a lot of rifles. So very different, but still transfer of power to the new Commander-in-Chief.
Biden also addressed the recent attack on the Capitol that were the reason behind the enhanced security at his swearing-in ceremony.
Just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever.
Among Biden's first acts as president was a visit to Arlington National Cemetery to pay respect to fallen troops. The Guard units mobilized to Washington, D.C. are slated to stay in the city for some time after the inauguration to help prevent further threats as the Biden administration takes office. For Defense News Weekly, I'm Daniel Woolfolk.
Thanks, Daniel. And in other military news this week, Secretary of Defense nominee, retired General Lloyd Austin III, was on Capitol Hill this week in his first appearance before Congress. Austin was in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee to face questions about how he would handle some of the biggest issues facing the military in 2021. Here's some of what he had to say.
Now, I know that a large measure of civilian control of our military lies right here with this body. And if you confirm me, I assure you that the Pentagon under my leadership will respect your oversight responsibilities, and we will be transparent with you. And I will provide you my best counsel, and I will seek yours. And just like you, I will take seriously the many challenges facing our country, the most immediate of which, in my view, is the pandemic. And if confirmed, I will quickly review the department's contributions to coronavirus relief efforts, ensuring that we're doing everything that we can to help distribute vaccines across the country and to vaccinate our troops and preserve readiness. We'll also do everything we can for our military families. They too are educating kids at home and losing their jobs and trying to stock the pantry. I know this committee shares my view that we owe them our best efforts to lighten that load. We also owe our people a working environment free of discrimination, hate, and harassment. And if confirmed, I will fight hard to stamp out sexual assault and to rid our ranks of racists and extremists, and to create a climate where everyone fit and willing has the opportunity to serve this country with dignity. The job of the Department of Defense is to keep America safe from our enemies. But we can't do that if some of those enemies lie within our own ranks. And for those enemies and adversaries outside the ranks and around the world, we need resources to match strategy, and strategy matched to policy, and policy matched to the will of the American people.
And finally, the U.S. Africa Command has announced that it has pulled out all remaining troops from bases in Somalia. U.S. troops in the Horn of Africa country were on hand to train local forces and help fight against terrorist organization al-Shabaab. The estimated 700 troops were to be sent to other U.S. bases in Africa, such as Kenya or Djibouti. And that's it for your military headlines for this week. When we come back, we'll learn about how the Pentagon is looking to speed up tech innovations on the battlefield, and check out how the French use microdrones for recon missions.
As more and more technology reaches the battlefield, so do the processes associated with them. In this edition of Actionable Intelligence, I speak to Defense News editor Mike Gruss about a recent Removing Stovepipe series from our sister publication, C4ISRnet. Mike, welcome. We've been doing the Removing Stovepipe series with C4ISRnet. What's the Removing Stovepipe series all about?
It's really an opportunity to talk about this problem that we hear about all the time in technology, which is just that the information folks need is stovepiped, and that from a very simple level, one organization may have an office and another organization can't get access to it, or doesn't even know it exists, which is an even worse case scenario. And so it's how do we kind of connect all these dots? And that's what we're doing with this series.
And in one of the latest ones, you spoke with Donald Coulter, a senior advisor with the Army's Network Cross-Functional Team, who talked about just that, about how removing stovepipes is so important and why it's a big part of Army Futures Command.
How we have to take not only just are two people doing the same thing, and they might be for a very good reason, because we're burning down risk, especially in the science and technology environment. We're trying different approaches to solve the same problems. But we also have to have that visibility because someone may have solved a similar problem, but in a completely different domain. And it's bringing those disparate groups together to really talk through those and identify some opportunities for convergence that's been powerful.
One of the big problems they're solving right now is that of wearable technology. That's a really big thing out on the battlefield. But just as you and I have our devices and our Fitbits and everything, we need to enter passwords and authenticate. Donald, talk to us a little bit exactly about how they're dealing with all that technology on the battlefield.
One of the projects that we're working on here and focusing on is a wearable authentication capability. And what this gives us in a traditional environment or enterprise environment, we have passwords that we have to change every so often, and we have CAD cards or tokens and things, but these can be broken, damaged, lost in an operational environment. And trying to put in a password under stressful conditions with tactical gloves on a tiny keyboard is not an optimal solution. So bringing in that multi-factor authentication based on public key architectures, but enabling it to leverage biometrics and make it easier, reduce the burden on the soldier while making our systems more secure.
Mike, he mentioned biometrics and kind of authentication factors. There were some really interesting ones, including the way people walk. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Sure, and I think he does such a nice job of explaining it, because there are so many days where some of us feel like we're all thumbs, and no matter what you type, it just doesn't line up. And he mentioned that there's that extremely stressful situation you don't want to be in and getting a password wrong. So what DoD officials kind of across the department are doing, including the Army that he mentioned, are kind of looking for these biometric ways to authenticate. In other words, like how can we tell you are you based on something your body's doing? And so one may be your gait, how you walk. Each person kind of has a fingerprint in the types of steps that they take and how their body maybe moves while they're doing that. And so that might be one way to say, like, yes, this is indeed Mike, and we can tell by the way he's walking that this is who he is. Another one might be heart rate. And even another one we've heard, not particularly for the battlefield, but, each person has a typing cadence. So it might be as simple as a typing cadence to know, like, hey, this is indeed Daniel, and it's not someone pretending to be Daniel.
Great, Mike. Thank you. We have a lot more live virtual events coming up featuring some of the best minds in the business. You can see the calendar for all our events and sign up at either defensenews.com or c4isrnet.com. And now for headlines. The French Military Procurement Agency has ordered 300 micro drones from Parrot for reconnaissance and intelligence missions. They'll be used by the conventional and special forces. Each of the 150 systems is comprised of 2 drones, and deliveries will begin in June. And that's just the start. The 5-year contract with a French company covers several hundred drones, the development of adaptations, the maintenance of equipment, software, and operator training. Forces will spend this year honing in on the exact numbers they need, as well as a delivery cadence. That contract is worth more than $36 million. And now down under, Australia has selected Boeing's AH-64E Apache Guardian as its next armed reconnaissance helicopter, replacing its Airbus Tiger fleet under a program to be worth more than $3 billion. That's according to an Australian government announcement. The selection of the Apache follows a request for information in July 2019 that called for 29 helicopters, with 24 to be based at a single location with 2 operational armed recon helicopter squadrons. The other 5 will be used for training. U.S. combat jets and a destroyer are to join the British Royal Navy's new aircraft carrier on its maiden operational deployment to the Asia-Pacific region later in 2021. The British Ministry of Defense announced that British Defense Secretary Ben Wallace and U.S. Acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller co-signed a joint declaration approving the deployment of U.S. Marines and U.S. Navy assets as part of a carrier strike group led by the HMS Queen Elizabeth. U.S. assets attached to the carrier strike group will include a detachment of Marine F-35Bs and a destroyer, the Sullivans. That's it for your defense news headlines this week. When we come back, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives us tips on the ins and outs of business loans. And later, an inside look at how MREs are tested to make sure they're providing the nutrients troops need.
On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives her latest tips.
From building your small business fleet and improving cash flow to renovating office space and purchasing IT equipment, as business owners come to find out quickly, you need access to capital to grow your company. So it's good that you actually do have options. If you're in the right space and time in your business, a business loan is a great place to start. It works like any other loan. You receive a lump sum of funding up front and pay it back in monthly installments over your designated period of time. Most banks or credit unions offer business loans, and the best place to start is the one where you've been doing your personal banking for years, the one you trust and the one that knows you. Before you apply, either dig up or create your business plan. You'll need that for any lender to consider lending to you for your business. You'll also need to provide a form of collateral or income to back up your reason for getting the loan. Another way to get access to capital is to get a business credit card. It's very similar to your personal credit card. You're given borrowing access to funds up to a certain limit for your business expenses. A lot of business owners make the most of a combo approach of business card and business loan, using the credit card for smaller day-to-day costs and the business loan to fund larger projects. Deciding what's best for your business depends on the type of business you own. And when it comes to growing your business, it should be a partnership between you and your lender.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next time. To get more of our coverage, be sure to visit our websites at Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com and DefenseNews.com. For our curated top stories in your inbox every day, subscribe to our Early Bird Brief. And to keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages. And when we come back, we'll get an inside look at how an MRE is made. Welcome back. For our final segment, the second part in our series, How an MRE is Born. In the first segment, we checked out how recipes for the new food items are designed in the military's test kitchen. But that's only part of the process. Each snack and entree must be rigorously tested to make sure it delivers the calories and nutrition needed to keep troops fighting. Military Times' Sarah Sicard looks at the science behind how MREs are tested for performance.
Welcome back to Military Times' look at how an MRE is born. Last time, we saw the test kitchen where MRE meal items are designed and cooked up. But there's a lot more to the process than just the dishes. There's a ton of science behind making sure MREs can keep active troops sustained and fighting in the field. An entire Army research division in Natick, Massachusetts is dedicated to studying how MREs sustain our troops. In this week's segment, we look at MRE nutrition and the great lengths scientists go to ensure soldiers get the most from their meals. We talked to Dr. James McClung, a nutritional biochemist with the Army, about how the service studies MREs for effectiveness. Hi, Dr. McClung. Thanks for joining us. If you wouldn't mind, could you just sort of, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hi, Sarah. So as you indicate, I'm James McClung. I'm the chief of the Military Nutrition Division at the Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine. The mission of our team is to understand warfighter nutritional requirements and to pass that information along to the Combat Feeding Division that then does the research and development for combat rations.
What does a nutritional biochemist really do for the average soldier?
My background is in nutritional biochemistry, and so I've got this fascination with the way that the nutrients work, particularly how do the nutrients work for our military personnel, and how may that be similar to or different from civilian populations. As far as ration design goes, our group is at the very front end of that.
In terms of, MRE development, Walk me through that process. Does it start with sort of a conceptualization of the nutrition first, or do you start with, let's say one of the more recent MREs to come out is the pepperoni pizza. Was that something that, it started out as an idea of, we want to develop pepperoni pizza, or was it more of, we need to get these nutrients into this form, and then you reverse engineer it that way?
So we're on the front end of that process. Our role is to understand what the nutritional requirements are. So basically, we gather evidence and information. Once we do that, we hand it off to our partners at the Combat Feeding Division, who then make a product that meets those nutritional requirements while also having the appeal and shelf stability requirements of a ration item for our warfighters. So it all begins with the knowledge regarding the nutrients that should be in a food product, and then transitions into the development of that material product that you might see out in the field.
Walk me through how you test an MRE for its nutritional value. What are some of the tests that you carry out in order to sort of find out, I guess, whether it's somebody who's going to be under the ocean in a submarine, or somebody who's out in, the desert for, days or weeks at a time? How do you sort of test, what's going into their food so that they can, perform in an optimal manner?
Right. So these are very involved biochemical processes by which a food item, a ration item, would be taken and then chemically analyzed for each vitamin, mineral, and macronutrient to include carbohydrate, protein, and fat. The methods for each of those nutrients is slightly different in the laboratory. A ration item would be burned in a flame that is very specific. When that ration item is burned, it will elude a certain wavelength of light, which we can detect for the analysis of minerals. Here in the Military Nutrition Division, in our applied laboratory, we will oftentimes assess the metabolism of nutrients using human volunteers. To do so, we may provide them with a prototype food product, which has nutrients that are labeled using stable isotopes. We may then ask them to engage in a relevant activity, such as patrolling. We will ask them to wear body armor while donning the uniform and marching on a treadmill, while also consuming the food product, at which point we may be able to draw blood or other biological specimens in real time to track the metabolism of such nutrients and their impact on military performance.
And that's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.